Yes, yes. Without delay, over to you, Shrestha.
Yes, sir.
Mm.
A very warm welcome to our speakers today, Dr. Kumar and Ms. Shalima. I welcome you from the behalf of our forum. It's uh, we have just begun with this series, uh, Thursday forum, where we are kind of trying to invite speakers from around the world to share their um, knowledge and insight on migration, diasporas, refugees, and global challenges being faced today in around these areas. And our first speaker was Dr. Iman Ahmed. She's a global uh, expert, an international expert on Sudanese diaspora, and we had a discussion with her on the present day situation, political, economic, and the conflict going in Sudan. So it was a very good discussion that we began from our the series that we have started, which has obviously been the brainchild of Dr. Sada sir himself, who has really pushed us to kind of not just read and read from our course material. It's a course on migration and diaspora. I forgot to introduce that. We are students of uh, this diploma course in diaspora and migration. Some of us are doing the diploma, and some of us are master students in the course as well. So it's a mixed batch of students from different parts of the world, people from Dubai, as we have seen in our discussions during the class, in our class, that people from all over India are also taking such courses, and we are discussing migration governance, the stand of Indian government, governments across the world on these issues. And it's always so good to be a part of this class and this course. And today also, it's an honor to have you people here with us. And to it would be a wonderful opportunity to learn more about the migrations from uh, not just the Caribbean, the migrations and the diaspora living in Caribbean today, but of course your own experiences, perhaps, as I what I've understood from Ma'am's just what she mentioned right now about her own experiences. So I'll just introduce Dr. Kumar. So it's a very simple. Uh, Sir, you're not audible. If you're saying something, you have to unmute yourself.
Sorry, Shalima is going first.
Yeah, Shalima
She's
ma'am
speaking
is
to.
okay. Okay. Oh, okay. So I'll just introduce her then. Uh, yeah. So Dr. Shalima, sorry, ma'am, you're an expert on diaspora migrations, and as I've just learned from Sada sir today itself, because we've had exams lately, so we haven't been able to catch up much on your a lot of things currently, but still what sir shared with me, I'll just let others also know about you and your work. um Ma'am has she's the co-director of the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center's weekly Zoom public meetings. She's a researcher, teacher by profession, business psychologist by education, and a former personal banking representative. That's a lot. She's a fifth generation descendant of Indian indentured immigrants who came to the island of Trinidad in 1869 from Uttar Pradesh. She has an MSc in business psychology, a BSc in psychology, a diploma in business management, and of course, her work must be very vast around these subject, as her comparative and interdisciplinary research interests are in the application of psychological principles to the cultural underpinnings of the interrelationships between people in the Indian diaspora across the generations. She is also a strong advocate for traditional Indian and alternative health and wellness practices. So I hope I think this would be a great starting point to I think understand what ma'am is going to be talking today about. So we'll have a 25 or 25 minutes, I think, discussion with her. She can use a PPT if she wants to, and then maybe we can have a question answer session afterwards, or maybe we can
Maybe,
have it the way
maybe,
ma'am
maybe,
wants us to go
yes,
for it.
at the end will be better so that, we can manage the time. And
Okay, okay, sir.
also, we have here Professor Vinod Khadria, who is a renowned migration scholar and worldwide known on his work. And we have also Dr. Amba Pandey, who has been working on gender and diaspora and so many other areas. So I feel we are very honored to have them. We have Dr. Raj Bardoli also, and they have been working on this area for a long time, and we are very grateful that they are here. So, okay, maybe we can introduce Dr. Mahabir, then we can start.
Okay, sir, I'll do that. Dr. Mahabir is also one of the scholars who have worked on the migrations from Caribbean. He's a senior lecturer in anthropology at the University of Guyana in the Caribbean and a research fellow of the ECLIS Center for American Studies. He's also the founder and executive director of the weekly Sunday Zoom program hosted by the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center. He is a former assistant professor at the University of Trinidad and Tobago. He obtained his PhD in anthropology from the University of Florida in the USA. His MPhil and BA are from English from the University of West Indies, and he's till date author of 12 books. So we are very, very honored to have you people today with us on this forum, and I hope we'll have an interesting discussion afterwards. So, should we start or should we?
Yes, we can now over to Shalima Mohammed and
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. And I just want to make one little statement here. If we were to consider anybody an expert on this, it would be Dr. Mahabir. It is really through my association with him that I became so interested and so involved in this research into our backgrounds and so on. So I really appreciate the opportunity to share with you all. And I hope you benefit from in some way from what I'm about to share with you. I'm trying to share my screen with you. Please let me know when you see it. Just 1 minute. Are you seeing my screen?
It's coming up.
yes, come.
Right, good.
Yes,
Good.
Okay.
Yeah, get it full screen now.
Sure.
Right.
Okay, so I just want to give you a little bit of a background as to how Indians would have migrated to here in the Caribbean, which is where I'm sitting right now in lovely Trinidad and Tobago. And it all started, we were told, because Britain at the time, who controlled the resources of both India and Trinidad, as well as some of the other islands in the Caribbean, was looking for a regular supply of labor. Incidentally, or coincidentally, on this day, 4th January in 1836, John Gladstone, who was a business owner, an absentee plantation owner, who was based in England, who owned properties, slave plantations, which was cultivating sugarcane, and he had cotton interests in America and so on, and tobacco in Virginia. John Gladstone addressed a letter to Messrs. Galanders, Arbuthnot and Company, who were based in Calcutta, and they still have business in Kolkata right now. He says to them, you will probably be aware that we are very particularly situated with our Negro apprentices in the West Indies, and that it is a matter of doubt and uncertainty how far they may be induced to continue their services on the plantations after their apprenticeship expires in 1840. He's penning this letter 4 years before apprenticeship should have happened. And this is apprenticeship of then African enslaved people. He says this to us is a subject of great moment and deep interest in the colonies of Demerara, which is the capital of what was then called British Guyana. It is now called Guyana. and Jamaica. These are two of the places in the West Indies where he owned plantations. He says, we are therefore most desirous to obtain and introduce laborers from other quarters, and particularly from climates similar in their nature. Of course, he's writing to Galanders and they because they had trading interests in India. So he's very familiar with their operations and so on. And he's asking for labor. 6 months later, on the 6th of June, 1836, Galanders and they replied to Gladstone in this way. Within the last 2 years, so you're looking now at 1834, upwards of 2,000 natives, that is Indians, have been sent from India to the Mauritius by several parties here under contracts of engagements for 5 years. So Indian indentureship really began in Mauritius. And if you do any research on this, in Mauritius, it is referred to as the Great Experiment. But in the West Indies, it is referred to as the Gladstone Experiment, simply because Indian indentures came to the West Indies as a result of this particular letter and arrangement started by Gladstone. So Galanders and they continue the reply. The contracts, we believe, are all of a similar nature, and we enclose a copy of one under which we have sent 700 or 800 men to the Mauritius. No women, just men. And we are not aware that any greater difficulty would present itself in sending men to the West Indies. The natives being perfectly ignorant of the place they agree to go to or the length of the voyage they are undertaking. Now, how would you feel if you were spoken about in these terms, that you were native, perfectly ignorant of the place that you were agreeing to go to? I think in these times we would want to get a lot more information, but back then in 1836, they didn't consider the Indians to be fellow humans and in need of great information. The letter continues, the men selected for Mauritius have hardly any ideas beyond those of supplying the wants of nature. And so we now, researchers, suppose that it is more likely that these people were easily duped into getting into some kind of contract with the recruiters. The Dangers, this is the letter replying, the Dangers they add in a subsequent part of the letter are always spoken of as more akin to the monkey than the man. They have no religion, no education, and in their present state, no want beyond eating, drinking, and sleeping, and to procure which they are willing to labor. And so this is the thought process that went into the recruitment of Indians to send them to both Mauritius as well as to the West Indies as labor for Gladstone. Later, what would happen would be that other planters who owned plantations, who needed to have enslaved Africans be replaced by a different form of labor, they would follow suit from what Gladstone did and also initiate contracts. When these contracts were initiated, some of the Indians would have agreed, and the photo on the right is the original ship's register, which shows you the names of some of the people who would have agreed to come as the first group of indentured immigrants to Trinidad. They would have traveled on a ship like the one you see in the photo. In those times, there were no steamships, there were only sail ships. The first ship bringing, or what was referred to as the coolie ships, bringing Indians to Trinidad in 1845 was the Fatal Razak. And at that time, 187 males came, 22 females who more than likely would have been wives of some of those males, but not always that case. And 28 children arrived to Trinidad on that vessel. So what were some of the push factors that would have made these Indians agree to come? Well, I just want to quote something for you, which was a conversation that David Debidine would have had. David Debidine is a former diplomat from Guyana who is an author as well, and who would have done an interview with someone who he's calling Mr. Ram. Mr. Ram is an Indian Guyanese. He's a descendant of indentured immigrants. His parents actually came from India, and this was his experience. If you would just refer to the third line, they were fleeing famine by the shiploads. So there was significant famine during that period in India. Mr. Ram explained that they would go anywhere, far or near. To stay in India was to borrow for roots or to borrow money to buy food. But the moneylenders' charges were so high, making you pledge land, house, wife, young daughters, that it was cheaper to starve than to outwait the sun. Rain did come, or what they considered to be a little bit of prosperity, hope rather, in the person of the recruiter. But the recruiter wanted little favors, and those favors, unfortunately, happened to be at the expense of people's marriages. So Mr. Ram explained that his mother had to perform a favor, and that was to allow the recruiter to have sex with her in order for she and her husband to be able to get the contract to be put on a ship to come to seek a better fortune in British Guyana at the time. So there were social consequences of that, of course. Mr. Ram's father no longer wanted to have anything to do with his wife because now she was what he referred to as Juta. And the woman as well, she didn't want to have anything to do with her husband because she had to have sex with this recruiter because her husband ordered her to do so. So she never slept with her husband again when they did indeed arrive in British Guyana. So Mr. Ram would have suffered as a child as a result because the man he knew as his father was not his biological father. His biological father was the recruiter back in India. And when the mother saw him at his birth, she did not want to have anything to do with him. She actually puked when she saw the child because she would only remember the way in which she was impregnated. So it was a very traumatic experience for them having to leave India, having to form the contracts in the way that they did. And it was also very traumatic for the child when he was born. Shifting now to Trinidad. When the indentures arrived in Trinidad, they would have come to a holding bay because they would have traveled on the sail ship for about 3 months. So at one point in time, they would have arrived here from the first sailing in 1845 to 1866, they would have arrived at the jetty in Port of Spain. That is the original site of disembarkation. But from 1866, they really arrived on a separate island, a very small island off the coast of Trinidad. And this is known as Nelson Island. If you look at the picture, you can see that the people were just huddled together like cattle. But in this particular location, they were treated for diseases, lice. Some who were malnourished were fed. They were brought then into a state where they could become efficient laborers before they were placed on the estates in Trinidad. On the lower right, you see what Nelson Island looks like today. It is now a protected heritage site. A little bit about the economics of indentureship. When the indentures arrived, now we are fast forwarding a bit, there was an agent general for the immigrants themselves. So the Honorable Agent General of the immigrants would collect and classify information, statistics and so on the number of people who came, where they came from, what conditions they were under, and where they were placed, which estates they were placed on to work. He had a staff of able clerks to assist him. 21 years after indentureship began in Trinidad, this is being written. It is now 21 years since the first coolie ship landed its freight on our shores, and a continuous stream has been kept up at a vast expense ever since. So you see, the Indians were not really viewed as people. They were viewed as commodities. They were an expense item for the planters because they had replaced free labor that was given by the African slaves. And so back in England, there was this big hullabaloo about whether or not indentureship should continue because it was so very expensive for the planters. You see, what happened after slavery ended is that many of the planters were unable to pay for the indentures to come. When the indentureship contracts were created, it was that the Indians were supposed to come, they were supposed to work for a certain period, and then they would be able to return after the end of their 5-year contract. They were to be given food, if you would count rice, dal, and some dried fish as good meals. That is what they were to be given. But all of that was considered to be an expense in addition to having to pay very minimal labor costs for them. But here is where it gets interesting. If you refer to line 4, we want population. You see, what the planters wanted and what England wanted was to populate the island of Trinidad. In this way, did we get it? He's asking whether or not by indentureship, did they get the population that they wanted? The population was essentially supposed to be to provide for labor. And if you look at the statistics on your left, 1851, the population was 82,978 people. That is, indentureship started in 1845. So some 6 years later, the population grew to 82,000. But if you come down to 1921, which is when indentureship would have ended, 365,000 people were here. So indeed, a lot of Indians did come and a lot of Indians did work here. The system was considered to be the salvation of the plantation, but it became very expensive. And so a question arose here that I always am piqued about. Is more expensive humanity towards his coolies to be required of the planter while his debts are yearly increasing? Well, what is more expensive humanity toward his coolies? It just points again to the way in which the coolies were thought of by the British. They were not humans on the same level as the British people. Must he supply him with taxed rice? Must he supply the Indians with taxed rice when it was always understood that the rice tax was imposed in order that the immigrant might thereby repay part of the expense of importing him? So the Indian is told that he is supposed to come here to give his labor and receive an income from it. But that's not necessarily what the British had in mind. So what were some of the terms of the contract? They were supposed to work for 5 years from the date of arrival in the colony and placement on a plantation. They were working under the orders of the governor, and they would work for 5 years to any employer of labor to perform work in connection with the cultivation of the soil or manufacture of the produce on any plantation. So this means that an Indian could have come, be placed on plantation X for 2 years, and because labor was required on plantation Y for 3 years, he would then be moved to that place. He would be working every day except Sundays and authorized holidays. He should be working for 7 hours in the field or 10 hours in the factory buildings. These were what was supposed to be the hours, but in actuality, they would work generally 12 hours or more, and there were hardly any breaks for meals. You just get to go very quickly, eat something very fast. Some overseer would come over you with a whip, and then you had to return to work. Wages were supposed to be payable on Saturdays and on Saturdays weekly. So an able-bodied adult male immigrant who was over the age of 15 would be paid 8 annas. An adult male not able-bodied or a minor male who was over the age of 10 would be paid something like 5 annas. Children were working too. So child labor was well taking place during the indentureship period. So children who were under the age of 10 would have gotten wages proportionate to the amount of work that they would have done. And if they did extra work, well, then they get extra money. So they were doing task work instead of time work. And task work was made compulsory on the estates when they should have been doing time work instead. So it was often very, very difficult for them to earn even a shilling because the terms that were laid out is not what was actually happening on the estates. They were supposed to be given medical care. They were supposed to be provided with hospital accommodation, medical attendance, medicines, medical comforts, and food free of charge. But a tax on rice means the food was not free of charge and was not good food, as I said before. And we also have proof that some people were denied access to the hospitals by the attending nurses. We have a case which was written about Mahabir in Guyana. Mahabir reported sick. The nurse told him nothing was wrong with him. He returned the next day when the doctor saw and admitted him as an inpatient. On the instructions of the manager of the estate, though, the nurse chose to discharge him without the doctor's permission and send the man back to work. Unfortunately, he died later that night. This was not Margaret's case alone. It happened on several occasions. We could talk about their rations too. The food was just not adequate. The immigration system was shaped to suit the needs of the planters. That was found to be the case. It was widespread. The Indians throughout the period of indentureship were searching for a means of escape from the estates. So if work and everything was so good on the estates, why would they want to escape? One planter boasted that if the laborer on his estate was not in the field or in the hospital, he was supposed to be in jail. So under these terrible conditions, why did the Indians choose to stay? Well, the diaspora Indians were accustomed to agricultural work and there was some connection to the land. So they decided, okay, they were accustomed to this, let's do this. They came with seeds, cuttings, flowers, and planting materials from India. And so when they arrived in Trinidad and Guyana and Jamaica and some of the other islands, they went ahead and they cultivated those in backyard gardens. 75% of them stayed partly because of the availability of land. What happened was, in order to encourage the Indians to remain, the 5-year initial contracts were then commuted to 10-year periods. And they made the contract a little bit better by saying you can get 1 acre of land for each year of labor. So you had to have worked for 10 years in order to be eligible to be able to get 10 acres of land. Over the first 30 years of immigration in the Caribbean, while Indian indentureship started in 1845 in Trinidad, it really began in 1838 in Gladstone's, where Gladstone had his plantations, which was in Guyana, and started in 1838 there. So from 1838 to 1868, the indentures were entitled to repatriation back to India only. From 1869, they were allowed to purchase land only after they completed their 10 years of residence in the colony. And to encourage the Indians to remain in the British West Indies, the colonial authorities offered them the 10 acres for those who opted to remain. The plantocracy, in a constant effort to reduce costs, sought to whittle down the concessions over a period of time. In fact, they were successful in doing so in Jamaica. So you could have only gotten land in Jamaica if you had worked for more than 12 years. But the colonial government insisted that in Guyana and Trinidad, the period would remain 10 years and then you would have been eligible to purchase land. And I don't know if that is what was the situation when my great-great-grandparents, Budley and Boudia, left India to come in 1869. They arrived on the SS Sevilla. They came with 4 children under the age of 10, 2 boys and 2 girls. And Nasiban is the mother of my great-grandfather. So when they came in 1869, the situation was that they had to choose between repatriation back to India or stay, work for 10 years, and then be able to purchase land. In our case, they stayed and they purchased land, and that's how I am here today. We can see that many of the former coolies became landowners, but it was a slow process. And if you refer to this document here, which is from 1866 in the borough of San Fernando in Trinidad, which is where a number of Indians had stayed living after they would have settled on the plantations and so on, you can identify Indian names, the fact that there were one names only. So, and their names were misspelled when they came to the islands as well. So Bisnoth Singh, Bhagwan Singh, Arundam, and I don't even want to venture to pronounce the first one, but these were 4 Indians on this particular form who would have purchased property. And they would eventually become quite significant property owners, business owners, and made an impact in Trinidad and Tobago, which is something that Dr. Mahabir will talk about. Indentureship, the recruitment of Indians ended in 1917. And this did not have anything to do really with what was going on in the colonies, except for the fact that the ships on which they were coming had to be used in the First World War, which was during the period 1914 to 1918. So by the India Defense of India Act 1917, the recruitment of Indians to be sent as Indian indentured laborers stopped. Ultimately, what you had happening was in British Guyana, 238,909, the single largest amount of Indian indentures in the West Indies went to British Guyana. The second largest came here in Trinidad, 143,000 plus. And then we have some of the French-speaking islands, Guadeloupe, Martinique, and French Guyana. They also had large numbers. But in the British territories, you had less than 50,000 in some of the others, and in some smaller islands, you had less than 5,000. But there are still in Trinidad, now Guyana and Suriname, descendants of those Indians in the largest concentrations. In some of the other islands like Jamaica, St. Lucia, Grenada, St. Vincent, and so on, very, very few of those Indians or descendants of those Indians remain. And here you can see an entire list of the British colonies to where Indian indentured immigrants would have gone, both in the West Indies, as well as, for example, Reunion, Seychelles, South Africa, Fiji, and where it all began in Mauritius. So I hope this was a little bit of an expose, which you did not have before. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Thank you very much for allowing me this opportunity to share with you.
Thank you, Shalima, for a very interesting and lots of data you have presented also. So now what we'll do, we'll have 2 presentations, and at the end only we can ask questions so that we can manage the time. So I request Dr. Mahabir.
Yes, thank you very much, Shalima, and thank you very much, Dr. Sahu, for this opportunity. I am going to take a different perspective, but a complementary one taken by Shalima. She dealt with the history of indentureship. So she dealt with the past. I'm going to deal with the present. And she dealt with indentureship and history. I'm going to deal more with culture. So my topic is entitled The Indian Contribution to World Civilization. Now, I'm going to focus, whereas she focused on the Caribbean and in some way to the entire diaspora, I'm going to focus on one island where we are located now, Shalima and I. And that's Trinidad. Trinidad is part of the West Indies, part of the Caribbean, a chain of islands, and which is very vibrant. So I'm going to address the following questions in this presentation. What makes Trinidad and Tobago, it's a twin island republic, unique in the Caribbean and the world? It stands out. What can we find here in Trinidad and Tobago that does not exist anywhere else, even in the neighboring islands, even in India, even in the rest of the world? What have we invented? Why are we so unique? And specifically, what have East Indians, Indo-Trinidadians contributed to this country that makes it one of the wonders of the world? So we call ourselves Indians, and we are referred to as Indians. So this is a work in progress, and I appreciate your contribution. So Shalima has pointed this out, so I won't go through it. This is the immigration of Indians to the West Indies, but this was during the indentureship. We see Guyana having the largest number of Indians, followed by Trinidad. But we must all remember that there is indentureship and immigration from India to not only the British colonies, but the French, Dutch, and Danish, right? So St. Croix, for instance, stands out. And you have smaller islands and so on. In some of these smaller islands like Nevis and St. Kitts, the Indians have practically disappeared, and there's no trace of Indian culture. Even if you find Indians, they are just phenotypically Indians. They look Indians, but nothing Indian about them. An interesting place to visit and to do research is Belize, because Belize has 12,000 Indians, and it's in Central America, and it's the only English-speaking country in Central America. So this is the population. Basically, you can see East Indians, we call ourselves East Indians, and Africans form the majority of the ethnic population, but there's a mixed component too, as well. So this is it. I'm going to rush through quickly. So most of you would have known Trinidad and Tobago mainly through V.S. Naipaul, Nobel Prize winner in literature, 2001. He has written about India, an area of darkness. He is one. He was banned from visiting India at one time, and the only Trinidadian to visit to have a Nobel Prize. Interestingly, there's institutionalized discrimination even today in Trinidad and I guess Guyana and most of the Caribbean islands. There's no animosity to individuals, but when you look at the structures, there is discrimination. So we have Hussein, which is Muharram, and it's observed only in Trinidad, not in the neighboring Guyana or Suriname. So if you want to study Hussein or Muharram, you have to come to Trinidad. There are remnants in Belize and Jamaica and so on. And we have a little video here, but I wouldn't go on to show that because of the time. And this is an interesting observance, because Muslims, Christians, that's the Shiite Muslims, and Hindus and Christians and almost everybody takes part in this. They participate, Africans as well. And you see the Tassa drums. And so we have we haven't invented the Tassa, because you see, I've seen the Tassa in Mauritius and it's in India too, and it came from the Middle East. But we have invented certain hands, that is rhythmic patterns. And the way we play the Tassa is unique to Trinidad. And we have the honor of having the first female prime minister in the Indian diaspora. That's Kamala Persad-Bissessa, who is in the middle there, and she has visited India and done a documentary. She has been able to trace her roots and so on. And today I really want to mourn the loss of our first Indian Trinidadian Prime Minister, Basdev Pandey, who passed away a few days ago on New Year's Day, and the funeral is next week, Tuesday. So I'm sure that is going to make the news in India as well, Basdev Pandey. So we have this Hanuman Murti, tallest statue of its kind in the world outside of India, located in a place called Orangefield. It's 85 feet tall. Tallest outside of India. So you have to visit Trinidad to see this monument. And we have the temple in the sea. Again, the only one of its kind in the world. And why I say that, because this was not built on a rock or an islet. This was built from the seabed up. So this is an aerial shot of it. You must come to see it. It's a postcard picture. And it is built by one man. Imagine that. And then we have still running Mastana Bahar, locally produced talent show, Indian culture, song, music, and dance, running up to today. Nothing. There is not even a non-Indian talent show that has superseded this in the number of editions. So you can see some statistics there as well. And then we have Rudranath Kapildev, who has the honor of inventing a theory, and it's called the Kapildev theory. And he must be credited, described as a Caribbean Einstein. And in those days, he must be given credit for having invented applications for mankind to go to outer space. So we have a Kapildev Learning Resource Center named after him. And then we have Kenneth Ramchan, who is around, thankfully, and he prominent literary critic, and it is he who really invented Caribbean literature, West Indian literature. He is a pioneer. I am sure in your university or somewhere in India, you're studying Caribbean literature. He has laid the foundation for that. And we have an Indian museum, which has closed during the COVID and has not been reopened, unfortunately. And it's public, it was public. A lot of photographs, historical photographs of early indented immigrants that Shalima has shown. And in this, we have documents. It's a Caribbean museum with documents from St. Kitts as well, neighboring islands. And we have some of these artifacts. There's a grinding stone called a chata, where you grind grains. You may still have them in the villages in India. And this is threshing rice. So we Indians again continued their activity of planting rice. So most of the rice farmers in the Caribbean are of Indian descent, and here they are beating the rice or threshing the rice. And there's a documentary show that I won't show it because of time. This is a 5-minute clip. You can go to BBC, How Britain Reinvented Slavery. Very, very great clip, and it's produced by David Davidian. So I'm going to just close up here by running quickly. This is a great, magnificent temples, beautiful temples and mosque. And we have Ramlila, still done in Trinidad, not Guyana, not Suriname, right? And it must be credited for being the oldest form of free outdoor folk theater, right? So that is there. Now, in sports, Indians don't play football, right? For some reason. So it's Black dominated, but Indians do participate at all levels in horse racing. So it's something that we have to look at and to trace. There's a video there, but because of time, I won't show it. And we move on. And when you look at the names of horses and the names of the horse owners, and then Tasram Maharaj, Harold Chedi, Shiraz, Muslims, Indians, Christian Indians, they're all actively participate in horse racing. And we have our chutney music, which we have invented. And we have our special type of roti. And we have invented dal puri, and we have Indian Arrival Day. We have the famous doubles, right? Nowhere else in the world do you find this. And I'll end there because in the interest of time. So you can ask your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mahabir and Ms. Shalima. It's very interesting. In fact, I feel nostalgic to see your pictures. as if I am also going to rural India. So many things are still here prevalent, but both the society, I think, moved a lot. We have also moved a lot, and the Trinidad society also moved a lot. So thank you for presenting so well and so captivating. Now I think we have around 10 minutes or 15 minutes question answer, and any audience, anybody has question, please ask. We have here so many very scholarly people. We have Professor Vinod Khadria, Dr. Raj Bardoli, Dr. Amba Pandey, Dr. Ruchi Singh, and so many, so many. So I request all of you to ask if you have any questions.
Okay, while others are thinking, I want to announce that we have ICC, Shalima and I are Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center. Our center has a weekly Sunday program every single Sunday for the past 3 years. So I'm going to put the email there if you want to join. It's academic.
Yes,
And
sir.
we talk about everything related to Indian identity in the diaspora.
Okay.
So you can join us.
Before I pass on to this question answer, I have a question actually. How do Caribbeans network with other co-diasporas, Indian diaspora in present context?
I didn't get the
With
Shalima,
other,
did you hear?
yes. How do Caribbean diaspora, Indian diaspora network with other diaspora like South Africans, Indian
Yes,
diaspora,
yes.
Mauritius,
Good.
and
Yes.
Malaysia, all this because they share a common history.
Yes, it's a common history of indentureship. So
Yes.
we are the early PIO or whatever name you want to call, because we came middle of the 19th century. From 1838 we were coming. Because when you talk about these migrants from India, we talk about the professional class, the doctors, the engineers, and so on. We came as laborers, but we are no longer laborers. You understand? We are professionals. And yes, we every year almost we have Indian diaspora conferences, and representatives from Mauritius, Fiji, India, everywhere come. But we have created this forum 3 years ago, where we meet every single Sunday, people from the diaspora. So join us. I'm going to type the email on the chat for you to join.
No, I have been receiving, in fact, and it is so interesting, but the timing is a little bit odd for Indians.
Yes, I know,
Yes.
but
Yes,
yeah.
we have Shrestha, but before that, I request Professor Vinod Khadria. He's here. He's president of GRFDT, which is very active in migration and diaspora research, and he's also a renowned scholar. You can see
Yes.
Google him and Google his name, will find lots of work done by him, and very
Thank you.
inspiring scholar.
Yeah.
Sir, over to you.
Thank you, Sadanand. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Well, those are very kind words you always shower me with. So, well, the bar goes up and up. It is a pleasure to virtually meet Dr. Kumar Mahabir because we have been virtually interacting through the Facebook. He puts, regularly very interesting and important, useful, kind of quotations from different parts of the world, from different people. Shalima, Mohammed, I listened to your elaborate presentation on the history of the Indian diaspora in the Caribbean and the poignant story of how women were treated and how then the scar, became permanent on their psyche. That's, I think, something that carries on. And as Kumar Mahabir said, this is the discrimination continues. This discrimination has become universal. That is there. See, what comes to my mind after listening to both of you in terms of history and then the contemporary scenario is the role of the Caribbean diaspora and the scholars in policy, in global policy. That's where I think the focus ought to be now, because things are going to change. There are a lot of activities at the global level in terms of policy changes, or at least changing the perspective. Policies, even if the policies change, the perspective remains the same. We do have, uh, you know, casteism and other kinds of discrimination, not only between countries, but within countries also. We do have them in India and in other countries. So that's where I think this should be a platform. It can be a platform by people like you, and you mentioned the institution in the Caribbean that can, take the initiative in terms of making its presence felt in the multilateral fora. That, I think, is the lesson that I can derive from your presentation today. And all these people who are participating here, they come from different parts of the world, and they should carry this message not only in terms of writing term papers and fulfilling the academic requirement, but also in terms of creating a voice of the unheard. That, I think, is a lesson that I could draw from your presentation. Thank you very much.
Dr. Kadria, if I may, I think you hit the nail on the head, because that's what we try to do with this Sunday program every week. We try to ensure that there is a voice for the unheard, and in every part of the Indian diaspora that Indians have, descendants of those indentures are, we get an opportunity to hear what their life is like. So I'm seeing Virendra Singh here. I don't know if that is our Viren. Shobi is here. There are a few people who we would have met who came from Guyana, South Africa, people who are indeed in the Indian diaspora, and we try to give them the opportunity to be heard. And what we found is that in several of the programs that we are doing, and now we are having Indian elders, so those who would have remembered their Aja, Aji, Nanu, Nani, who were indeed indentures, the stories are very, very similar, irrespective of whether you come from Mauritius or South Africa and so on. Minor differences because of the culture. You've had to acculturate, you've had to integrate and so on, but very few differences. And we love being able to talk to network rather in the diaspora. So thank you very much for pointing that.
Thank you.
So I see someone asking a question there about caste. Now, we like to boast that India has to learn from us about social interaction. We have no caste system. That has been destroyed by the history, because when you're coming as immigrants, all of you have to stay in the same depot, the same ship for 3 months. You have to talk and share food and all kind of thing. So caste has disappeared. And this Muslim-Hindu conflict, there is none of that in the Caribbean. We live cordially, respecting each other's religion, but maintaining your identity. So the dowry system and all of that, all the negatives have disappeared. Our common problem as Hindu Indians, Muslim Indians, is institutional discrimination against us as Indians, because others don't see the differences, whether you're Muslim, Hindu, Christian. They see us as Indians, and they discriminate against Indians. So we have, not by choice, we have all banded together in a common identity.
We have Vijay Kumar, John George. Any question from you, Vijay?
Yes, sir. Yeah, both Shalima Mohammed and Dr. Mahabir shared very good thoughts about the cross-fertilization of the ideas. My question is, how can we integrate both Indo-Caribbean or Indian or the Indian diaspora to get the commercial, profitable, business-oriented activities, like how to coordinate this? Please take a thought on this. That's what I request Dr. Mahabir and ICC.
Shalima, that's Shalima's question.
Mr. Kumar, thank you very much. Nice
Okay,
of you to join us here on this platform.
thank you.
The difficulty lies in the fact that we are so widespread. We have a lot of goods coming in from India in particular. And I'm just going to link this, Mr. Kumar, if you don't mind. I'm going to link this to a question that I'm seeing in the chat, in which there's a question which asks, why does India and Trinidad bilateral economic and strategic ties not as good as India have with Mauritius, Maldives, or South Africa? Okay, in the first instance, Trinidad is a little island. We have just about 1.4 million people in our little island. We are a drop in the bucket in a little place. So we do not have as much natural resources available to us as, for example, South Africa, large landmass, etc. So we have to, what we produce and have been producing is essentially oil. Our agriculture has been decimated significantly. At this point in time, we are not even producing enough to be self-sufficient. And that's the unfortunate thing. So we cannot contribute to India because India seems to be producing everything. If I were to call any place self-sufficient, it might be India, especially in terms of food. But I understand from the statistics that it does not consider itself to be self-sufficient. We have been exporting Trinidad, little Trinidad, rarely export to India in small quantities, additives to other industries there. Say, for example, we had Ispat here, we had Mittal Steel here. When they closed up shop, the plant and machinery and equipment and so on was sold back to India as scrap metal. We do some things like that. We are greater importers of items from India than we are exporters. And at this point in time, I think if we were to think about any other territory in the Indian diaspora, it would be an ideal situation that we can have trade with those places. But when India is such a massive producer of everything that we need, we just cannot compete. And so it is not left up to us, descendants of the indentures, to create the policies that are required. It is left up to our government. And unfortunately, when the government looks at the holistic picture, it does not allow for Indian diaspora trade in which these countries will engage. And that's simply because although we have, you have to look at our population as well. The amount of descendants of Indians in Trinidad at this point in time is just about 50%. We have 50% of other. So it's not in, we can't control what is the trade that actually takes place. And we cannot manipulate it then to make it more Indian. In fact, I don't think it would be advantageous to do so either. We would not have a competitive advantage if we were to do that. So I hope I've answered both questions in some way. If I haven't, please, you can just shoot it again.
Yes.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Dr. Raj actually, who spent quite a good time in Trinidad Tobago, and she want to ask some question.
Can
Dr.
I
Raj?
add something, Sadaji? Can I
Yes,
add
yes,
something to what
yes,
Shalima said?
yes, please.
Okay, I'm because this is continuation of what she has been saying. Thank you, Shalima. That's a very important. You explained it very well. But just let me say something that India's diaspora policy is also closely linked to India's strategic interests. So the importance of Mauritius is much to do with India's interest in the Indian Ocean region. You know, Mauritius too is a very small country, but it has a lot of importance for India. And that is basically because it is one of the most important partners of India for India in the Indian Ocean region, where India is really strategically very interested. So that
I think got caught. So
Yeah.
if you got the question, please go ahead.
Oh, she's back.
Okay. Dr.
Can I
Pandey,
ask a question?
connection is not good.
I have a question.
Just wait.
Yes.
Dr. Pandey, can you complete your question or suggestion if you have anything? I think connection is
No, it's fine. It's fine. I have added. Yeah.
okay. Thank you so much. I think we have very little time now. Dr. Raj, then we have Dr. John. Dr. Raj. Dr. Raj, I think she has also issue.
Okay.
Okay, you go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you for the wonderful talk again, Dr. Kumar and Mrs. Shalima. I am Captain Johns. I currently work with the Indian Army. So I have two questions actually. The first question is, you had reiterated on the fact that the Britishers brought in a lot of slaves from India as well as Africa to the Caribbean islands, and a lot of years back. But then, what is that one particular reason that made the Indian people to stay there, or the African slaves to stay there? What is that one particular reason, after taking into account all the factors that you've um, uh, shown in the class? What is that one factor that made them stay there over the course of all these years? And my second question is, in this particular island, where you have a lot of people with different ethnicities and different historical backgrounds, how have the people intermingled over the course of time? The Indians, the Africans, the I don't know, people later on from different other countries, different ethnicities. How have they mingled with the population and currently created this new bunch of, the Caribbean population?
All right. I will give my part, and then Shalima will talk. I would be short. So it's your question you're asking about why they settled and why they remained. It fits in the general theory of migration and settlement. It happens globally over time and space. Any group of people in thousands going to any country after they finish their contract, some would remain for various reasons. Secondly, about the social interaction, it's cordial at various levels, and yet there's competition at various levels. So all is not honey and flowery and so on, right?
Okay.
It depends on which, because the politics is ethnic based. You have Indian-based party and African-based party. Right now, there's an African-based party, and so, of course, they devise their policies in favor of their voters, and Indians are marginalized and discriminated against. Shalima?
Thank you. So, Captain George, I will just say that there is, just to add to what Dr. Mahabir has said, there is no single reason for the Indians having remained. There are a whole lot of factors. One of them had to do with the fact that they received incentives to stay, which was the land. When they left India, it was in a situation of famine. If your land was unproductive, you're not going back into that situation because you may not be able to get food. Yes, they had letters going back and forth between India and Trinidad, but it was few and far between. So you might have had, over a period of 5 years, you might have been able to correspond with your relatives in India. If there were any left, you might have been able to correspond maybe through 2 or 3 times. And I'm saying if there were any relatives left, because very often you would have families leaving, entire villages leaving and coming. So who are you going to go back to? The other thing is, at the end, when the contract periods changed from initially 5 years to 10-year contractual periods, by the time some of them decided to accept repatriation and go back to India, they could not find their way home. Villages had changed, addresses had changed. There was no one to go back to. And remember, somebody asked on the chat in what areas they would have left. Well, according to the records that we have available to us, Uttar Pradesh, basically, there were some people who would have left Madras and come over. So they would have had to go down to the port at Calcutta, Garden Reach Road, in order to be able to get onto the ships to come to the Caribbean, for example. It was a long way from Uttar Pradesh to get to Kolkata, and I don't think they were taking trains or taxis at that point in time. So when they repatriated, the same ship would go back to Kolkata, Calcutta at that time, and where would they go to next? We also have to take into consideration that some people did not choose to come. There were many instances where women were abducted and thrown onto the ships because the recruitment process was not as clean as it had started out being. And there were policies being put in place after about the first 10, 15 years of indentureship. There were policies put in place by the British government to sanitize the process. But at the same time, recruiters were getting money and other incentives, as I would have described, other incentives for getting people to come onto the ships. And so those who were kidnapped didn't know where to go. We have reports, we have narratives, we have documentary evidence of women who, up until they were in their 90s, and of course there's no indentureship left at that point in time, they were 90 years old, still crying because they still assume that their brother and their father is waiting at the mandir in India where they've got separated, and this woman got onto the ship, she was forced onto the ship, and she was brought into Guyana to live and to work. So what do you do when you get into a situation like that? Well, you are there, you've got to live. There is a man on the estate, he might be attracted to you, the pundit or imam or whoever was there would have put them together. And in some cases, there wasn't even that arrangement. People came together because what do? You have to live. I hope that answers the question.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
Shalima and Dr. Mahabir. Any other question left? I think, Shrestha, yes, please go ahead.
Ma'am, sir, my question is about what about those people? You also talked about children being there or as indentured laborers. So were there orphans? Were there children must have also got sick, and like in those critical conditions, how were these British officials or plantation, how were they dealing with such typical or exceptional cases?
Shalima.
So this is where you had the Christianization of the indentures take place. Because when you had the orphaned children, by and large, you would have the Anglicans taking them. There were what are known as coolie orphanages set up by the Anglican Church. There were institutions similarly, but not necessarily referred to as a coolie orphanage done by the Catholic Church. And then later on, the Presbyterian Church came because they saw the condition of the Indians being so bad that a Canadian Presbyterian minister, John Morton, decided to come to Trinidad on a crusade to help the Indians. And this is where education of those orphaned children started, and later on it went on into some of the other Indians. So the British government did not necessarily assist those children as much as the churches did.
Okay, we have I think final question will take from Dr. Raj Bardoli. She worked with the University of Trinidad Tobago. Over to you, Dr. Raj.
Thank you very much. Thank you to both presenters. I think the historical presentation as well as contemporary are quite interesting. I don't have a question. I just want to make a couple of comments. And one is, what do we learn from this historical perspective of the diaspora, in this case, Indian diaspora? By the way, I'm also from the region, Dominica. I have taught at the University of Guyana, worked in Trinidad, Jamaica, and lots of other places. That's by the way. The comment I want to make is that we can learn from such historical narrative or details that the cause of migration remains the same. That is, apart from slavery, where people were forced to go and work, it wasn't their choice. In the case of indentured, it was a choice. So that remains, and I think that's one thing one cannot deny, that it continues to contemporary time. People are moving because they cannot or don't have access to good or decent living. Now, in the case of indentured people from India, I mean, there was force as well as by choice, because there were, it's in addition to economics, there were other discrimination. And I give you the example of Siddharth Ramphal. His family, his mother, had to leave India with, not his mother, his grandmother, sorry, his grandmother or great-grandmother, with one of her kids because she lost her husband and there was, she was being ostracized and it was impossible for her to live in that country. So she had to leave. So that was a choice. And out came, you know. So the other thing I want to say is that when people do migrate, they really benefit. There are social benefits, but there are also individual benefits. And we see that even today, those who were able to leave are slightly better off than those who were not able to leave, who wanted to, but who couldn't. So you have got lots of examples of people excelling, especially the Caribbean diaspora in all walks of life. And coming back to Professor Kadria's comment, and I think that's very useful, and that is happening, how the diaspora can be engaged in shaping multilateral policies at the multilateral level. And it is happening. Now, increasingly, member states are approaching Caribbean islands. I mean, we are like, what, 16, 18 small islands, but each vote counts. So they are trying to work on them to see how they could be part and parcel of this, even though they are very small and vulnerable, but they carry a vote in the General Assembly. And now increasingly, although they can't vote in the Security Council, but they are members. Some are. Guyana is now, I think, currently president of the Security Council. So I think there is visibility coming, and that's largely because I think they have excelled in education, because education remains accessible and available. And because the Caribbean is in the American hemisphere and they have access to universities in the US, some go back, some don't. So you've got a pool of highly talented people, not to speak of the cultural part that Dr. Mahabir spoke about. And that is one of the special traits of Trinidad, the steel band and the mixture of music, soca, and the others, which are gaining tremendous recognition, and at the same time, people want to learn that, and you will find. So the comments I'm making is that with migration, there are benefits. So we can't say migration doesn't provide benefits to individuals or to societies and so on. And I think diaspora is a tremendous pool of resources which perhaps need to be, I'm not saying need to be exploited, need to be integrated. And as you know, the Africa region has recognized the African diaspora as a sixth region and trying to approach them and trying to integrate them. But the question is whether the diaspora wants to be part of that policy at the national, but definitely at the international level is another thing. So I have to say that I have learned a lot historically from both presentations, and I think a lot of work has gone into putting together this data. And thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Raj. I think this should be the last question, if not anymore. Over to you, Dr. Mahabir and Ms. Shalima.
Okay, I want to just make a final comment, and that is, although Shalima teaches business, and she has a master's in business psychology, we are academics. and we are interested in academia. People want to do research, people want to do masters, people want to do PhD, you want to write books, you want to do webinars, we can assist and accommodate you. Thank you. Shalima?
Sorry, I was taking down the information on the chat there.
Okay.
Um,
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead, please.
Let me just refer to Dr. Badwe's last question, and I think it had to do with whether or not people in the Indian diaspora would like to be integrated. I hope I got that correctly. Yes, we would like to be integrated. We would like to be included. But what we found on our own visits to India is that India does not really. India has its own, as in every country, India has its own interests at heart. And at this point in time, the impression that I get is that if you are already on the outside, you're on the outside. And that is what would have happened, as Shobi reminded me. That's what would have happened when a lot of the indentures would have been repatriated and went back. You have already left, you are no longer included. So we have had this problem of even being considered. I mean, there's persons of Indian origin and there's overseas citizen of India. And now there is no longer that PIO the acronym that can apply to us. We can't get PIO passes. We really can't get anything. Even Dr. Mahabir and I went to the archives in India, in New Delhi, to be able to access information. And we could not get any information without having a letter from an institution. So I think we would love to be included. Meanwhile, though, we live where we live, outside in different countries, and we have an Indian diaspora, and we communicate with members of the Indian diaspora. And I think on a social level, once we keep that social communication, that networking going on, we feel included. There is a degree of inclusion. We can see people in India. We can go to India. Do we want to necessarily live in India? I don't know. Do Indians still want to come and live in Trinidad? Those who do, well, some of them choose to stay for a while if they can find a spouse and all that. And then those who don't, or even for a small while, they move on. And I think this is a thing that we need to remember about Indians. We are such a resilient people, those of us with Indian DNA. We are very resilient people, and it doesn't matter where we are placed, we will thrive. And I think I'll end there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Shalima and Dr. Mahabir. I think when Dr. Mahabir told Ms. Shalima is a business teacher, but when I see her presentation, she has done a very good historical work. Lots of information from various archival sources, and it was very well done. And Dr. Mahabir, as you told, all diasporas are exemplary in terms of social engineering. In fact, still we are struggling with caste system, but when we see the diasporas, especially indentured diaspora, you have given us, kind of examples we should follow. And this is what we are, in fact, diaspora is a leader in that sense. In fact, in many areas, political and other area, we have seen how Guyana, Trinidad, Tobago, they have, excelled, better than some of other countries. And this is a very good example. And we are hearing your talk, and again, we can think that how to learn from each other, how to do business with each other, how to encourage each other. And these are the things. And as Professor Khadria mentioned, we should also think of how to bring voices from this, marginalized section. And these are the things we should think of. And I thank everybody. Abha, please mute yourself. I thank everybody, especially Dr. Mahabir, for kindly agreeing to this, giving this talk, Ms. Shalima. And also we are very fortunate to have today Professor Vinod Khadria, Dr. Amba Pandey, Dr. Raj, and many other, migration scholars who have great name across the globe in terms of their contribution to scholarship. I thank the student of IGNO, all the students of the last 4 batches. This is your initiative and much more to do. I think this is the culture, I think personally I feel is a great culture for academics. You need not to learn only to get certificate. This is what we want to know, and many other things other than your classroom. This is where you can see the entire scholarship, from global level, various people speaking to you. You are networking with them, reaching to their mind, talking to them. This is a great forum. I wish all of you should take, advantage of this and make use of this space. And thank you everybody again. And we look forward to meet you again last Thursday again. We have this first and last Thursday for every month, Miss Mark, for this kind of seminar. And I thank again Shrestha for giving the introductory remark, and thank all our students and all participants. Thank you again.